I want to welcome you to Kokoro Conversations. My name's Alex Lang.
And I'm Rebekah Anderson.
And today we're going to be talking about how technology has impacted our lives. It's a topic that actually I think about all the time. I'm sure you all are thinking about it all the time as well, as the technology has really leapfrogged in ways that I think many of us have not expected, given AI and whatnot. So we're going to take a look at technology as a whole, how it's impacted our lives, and kind of what that means for us as individuals, as friends, as a society. So I want to start off and just talk about maybe how you think technology has benefited society as a whole. So let's start with the positives.
Right. Well, I have to say, I read a book a couple of years ago that changed my understanding of what technology is. Because when I thought of technology before, I thought of things that have electricity or that require internet, like automobiles even. That was kind of how I thought of technology. But this author talked about innovations that were technological to the society that used them. So one of the examples that really stuck with me, like now in therapy, there's a kind of therapy called EMDR that uses like eye movement to help the brain integrate information that's been difficult to because of trauma. And this book talked about the fact that there was a time in history when people would go and see a play. They'd come back from war, they'd gone through horrible things, similar to the things that people experience in war today, and they would watch a Greek tragedy, which involves similar things, and the muses, the people telling the story, would walk back and forth on the stage. And this author talks about the fact that a lot of people believe that the movement of the eyes mimicked what modern psychiatry does now, but early people had this different way of evoking the same sort of healing. So they talked about things like that, things about storytelling. All of these were forms of technology. And so I think it's easy to say, like, those sorts of things are really good. On the other side, we have things like pasteurization, the discovery of antibiotics that help people in surgeries to not get infections. Those sorts of things are all technologies that have obviously been beneficial. And now, of course, we have computers, we have cell phones, things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can back up because I think that you're even let's go back to the Greek play idea for a second, because I think that's an interesting entrance into technology. Because so often when we think about technology, the immediate thought today, of course, as you said, is computers, because that is such a ubiquitous aspect of our lives right now. If we go back 10,000 years, which is generally where we see the agricultural revolution. Now that is the first very unique moment in history where human beings start to figure out, okay, we can have cyclical planting in fields, and that cyclical planting, as long as there's rain and not blight and all those types of things, gives us a sense that we can depend on growing crops. In fact, we can grow more than what we need, store it, and then we're going to be okay during times of famine. So the idea that you can till the land, and they had to develop means and methods of doing that via animals that they would domesticate. This is one of the first big things that you can see as technological innovation that really transformed our society, because as we know, it is with the cultivation of land that now we get into the idea of property. Because prior to that, hunter-gatherers, they just wandered. There was no concept of ownership in the same way.
Absolutely.
Which then, of course, creates the idea of, that's where, in essence, marriage comes from. Because now you have people, before you would just, in hunter-gatherer societies, you might find somebody, you might spend time with them, you might have a child with them, but there was no concept of marriage or even really monogamy. It did happen, but it was rare. Whereas now that you have property and you need to maintain that property for the lifetime of your family or for centuries, generations thereon, then now you do have monogamy as an ideal, because we need to make sure that we're keeping this property in the family because it is our survival. We need that that agriculture to live.
Yeah. You're talking about land, and I just think about one of the things you learn about a lot in elementary school in the United States is the way that guns for early settlers, they really changed the world. That was the innovative technology of that time. And of course, what a gun looks like, at the founding of the United States or during the time of the colonies, it's so different than like an AR-15.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're bringing up another really interesting point, which is that if you think about the difference between the Civil War in the United States, which was horrific and killed so many people, and it was just so bloody. I mean, World War I eclipsed that in ways that's really hard for people to imagine. Because now you have rather than like in the Civil War here in the United States, you're still loading the musket, you're still kind of getting it all together. You didn't have encased bullets with the casings, where now you can just fire incessantly. And that, and if you ever see some of the most horrific footage I've ever seen is actually of World War I veterans coming back, and the shell shocked. It's the first generation of people who really, everybody's dealt with war in the past, because war has been around for forever, but that level of carnage had never been witnessed before in the history of the world.
Yes.
And it's something that I think is very hard psychologically to fully appreciate, which brings us back, of course, to what you were talking about with the Greeks and that the idea. That's a really beautiful concept that they could come back from war, experience these tragedies, and process some of the trauma. But the scale of death that we're talking about in something like World War I, as a result of a technological innovation, of a gun, changed things.
Well, what I think a pattern I'm identifying in what we're talking about is that technology is groundbreaking. It begins and people are blown away by it. And then they have to come to the realization of the fact that this technology has created a new world entirely. And there are ups to what that new world offers people. There are also downsides that are very real. And I think about how I understood the world as a child. And this is not a bad thing necessarily, but I definitely thought adults around me, they knew how to do everything. They know how to drive a car. They know how to make my food, to press the button on the dishwasher that will make the dishes clean, and wash my clothing. They know how to do all of this. And so I think I came into the world with an understanding that, to a large extent, adults understood the technologies of the world, because that was what I saw. The technologies that existed in our home were ones that they had a firm understanding of to a large extent. And I think also that created the belief in me that when new technologies would come forward, that all the adults in the world would have a great sense of what needed to be done with those and how to put kind of barriers or walls, guide rails, I think is the best way to describe it. Guide rails to be put in place, regulations that would allow technology to be mostly safe.
But a part of the reason why it was safe, or why adults could easily kind of come around to it, and to be fair, right? Every generation you have people, when you introduce technology, just as an example, you went from the phone, which was a thing on a wall where you pick it up and you can listen to people talking, that's like the party line idea, which is because everybody's connected to everybody else.
Absolutely.
To separate phones with a rotary dial, right? Where you rotary dial, and then, you're getting to push dial. And what's interesting is, and with every generation, I can tell you, my grandmother was like, this isn't the thing. It's you spin the wheel. She's now, that's an upgrade in technology where you're just pressing the buttons. It's much easier. But
absolutely.
no, she was not going to adopt that. That's not how you dial the phone, right? You do it with the turn. You're talking about a lot of things that are mechanical.
Absolutely.
Like a microwave, or like you said, a dishwasher, or even cars at that point.
Yeah.
They're mechanical, they're understandable, they're not yet digital at that point. Sure. But in the 1980s is when the switch starts to happen into the digital era, where no longer is technology, it's mechanical in the sense that it's a machine.
Yeah.
But what's driving it now is something quite different. So Buckminster Fuller had this idea of what was called the knowledge doubling curve. And he actually didn't coin that phrase, but it was associated with some of his thinking.
Yeah.
So the idea was that he figured out, just generally, that human knowledge doubled for most of human history about every century.
Yeah.
So it would be like you'd have a century and that would kind of double the amount of knowledge. That started to change in the 20th century, where it started to happen every 25 years. So every 25 years, all of a sudden now the knowledge is doubling even more. So it's kind of like we hit this point where really, and it came honestly with electricity. That was a big, the foundation of electricity changed where we were going. Of course, engines changed where we were going with that, but all of that's kind of combined. So every 25 years throughout the first half of the 20th century. And then all of a sudden, once we get into the digital age, now things really start to ramp up exponentially. And there was a paper produced by IBM back in the early, or maybe late 2000s or early 2010s, where they estimated that with the advent of AI, that what we would eventually see is the knowledge, the full knowledge of humanity being doubled every 12 hours. So basically, once AI gets fully ramped up and it's fully able to take everything in, that essentially, and it's producing its own research on things, that it can do it so quickly that basically you'll double every 12 hours. Which brings up the main point, which is that at a certain juncture with technology, it gets out of our control. Because you were talking about how you watched your family, right? Like they could operate everything that was kind of in their realm, everything that was mechanical. Your dad is somebody, you talk about him working on the railroad. This is a guy who understands mechanical things in ways that few people actually really do.
Yeah. Yeah, he can fix anything. It's like he understands you open up a car, he gets how the pieces work. And it's just, he grew up learning how to do that on a regular basis, and so he has the vocabulary.
And it's intuitive for him, and he gets it because of the generation he grew up in.
Absolutely.
Now, hand him something digital though, right? And all of a sudden, it's now out of his grasp. And yes, it's one thing to be proficient in using it. It's another thing to fully understand how it functions. And I would say, I use digital stuff all the time. I consider myself pretty knowledgeable and fluent in how to use most things.
Right.
It is quickly getting out of my grasp. And honestly, I don't understand how most of it even functions.
Yeah.
It's well beyond that. And so the question then becomes, when something starts to get out of our grasp of truly understanding, we're just the end user of it. We don't even fully comprehend how it all comes together, how it works. What does that do to society? How does that impact us? And this gets us, I think, into the question of what are some of the negative aspects of technology for society?
I work with a lot of older people who are like, I'm pretty happy living my life in this way. I don't really want to use email. My father, he has a cell phone. He bought one, but he keeps it in his car. Like, he has it to call, he goes up and he hunts, and in case of an emergency, he can pull it out up in the mountains and call.
He's not tweeting about about what he shot or anything?
Sadly, no. That would be fun. He could be a wilderness vlogger, maybe. That would be fun. But all that to say, there are people for whom, and people who are young, people who are intelligent, people who are agile, who are not really willing or want to go down the route of what technology is doing, or who are rightfully wary. I talked about coming into this world feeling like the adults in my life had a good understanding of what technology had, and I think the first thing that made me just kind of notice that maybe they didn't was I was in 7th grade when I got a Facebook. I was 12. And we would have these assemblies in school that would tell us, do not friend people who are strangers. Do not ever send photos to a stranger. Don't do this. And I can remember this man screamed at us in an assembly. I learned that a lot of my peers are not this way, but I was like, okay, I will not do any of that. Like it worked for me specifically. I was scared. And then I find out my mother, she's friending people who live in France. She's friending people across the country. And I'm like, Mom, you're not supposed to do that. She's like, it's fine. Don't worry. And I was like, like this is a very, and of course she's older. She has better skills to be able to know what's acceptable, what's not, to know how to keep herself safe.
She's like, Rebekah, here's your new father. He's from New Zealand.
He doesn't hunt in the same way that your real dad does, but he can provide something a little different. He'll let us see where the Lord of the Rings was filmed. New Zealand citizenship is one click away.
That's right.
Well, all that to say though, I mean, like there are these new rules that are not necessarily clear to people. Mm-hmm. I listen a lot about like some of the debates around teen use of technology, the way that there are really serious findings about the impact of Instagram and unrealistic kind of images around what life looks like and what women's bodies look like that is having a serious impact on young girls specifically. Like I think that is the population that they're finding is most effective in their sense of self-worth is young girls who are on Instagram a lot. They're really struggling. And so it's just the sort of thing where this is very new. We don't quite know the impact of all of it, certainly not long term. I mean, I was 12 when I got Facebook. Now I'm 20, I'll be 29 later this year. But so it's still around. We still don't know what the impact of having Facebook for your entire lifespan will be, for instance. I've heard a technology specialist describe that like the easy access to pornography for young kids is one of the greatest experiments that we as humankind have taken. Basically, I mean, pornography has never been so easily available to young minds. And so the truth is we don't really know how that's going to impact somebody who starts watching porn regularly from a really young age. We're still not quite sure what that's going to look like as they grow up.
The interesting question that comes out of technology, which we can see, I think, most clearly in the atom bomb, is that, as you pointed out, there's to every technology when it comes out, usually people are like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? And then we slowly realize the negative side of it. Now, the atomic bomb, that was the negative side from the get-go, right? Now, we got to the positive side, which was atomic energy and the clean energy that comes from nuclear power plants that came after that. And that's an interesting one because it's inverted. But most of the time a technology comes out, we're super excited about it. It's super great. But there's the consequence slowly dawns on us. So I think right now, if we're jumping now back into where we are today, with the advent of AI like ChatGPT, which I talked to a technology expert who walked me through something about ChatGPT that he was really surprised about. He said what ChatGPT can do in terms of its reasoning, its ability to take very abstract concepts and then blend them together. He said, I thought that would not happen until the mid to late 2030s. Because that's what I assumed would be the case because it seems so far off. And so to me, the problem with where we're looking today, if we're talking about ChatGPT or any of these AI technologies that are going to be used, you said, you use pornography as an interesting thought experiment of where are we headed to right now. We can see some of it with the incel movement kind of happening currently, right? Which is starting to really build in a way that it hasn't before. But I think that when it comes to something like ChatGPT and knowledge, is that we're going to see, in my opinion, this is my future prediction, that it's going to cause a brain drain, not in the sense that you're going to have people not still going to school, but the brain drain is you're not going to have the ability to come up with new, innovative thought around an idea. Because what that requires is not for a computer to do it, but for you to sit back, to think through something and to have the ability to really question your own thinking, to work with it, that's a skill that's learned from a liberal arts education, supposedly, where you're writing papers, you're wrestling with things, like you're working through ideas. If you can just type in a prompt and have it spit out a paper and you never do that, you never develop the skill. It's like lifting weights. If you don't work at it, you never build up the muscle.
Like, I can remember being in grad school and I had to write a paper for a sociology class. And I remember that the process of writing the paper, I had to turn it in for a grade. So I had to just write based on this hypothesis that I formulated. By the time I was done writing, I disagreed fundamentally with the hypothesis that I did, because I had the time to really think through these ideas. I didn't have the time in that class, given that we were in the middle of finals, to really rework the paper or do more research to find a different answer to the question. So I had to sort of, from the standpoint that I was taking, argue this point. But after that, I took another class where something relevant from that paper came forward, and I was able to write out my ideas and really put forth something that I really agreed with. And I think about that connection I made almost every single day, truly. And it's just the sort of thing where I really appreciate what having to think an idea through to its logical end, to its illogical end, getting to turn this stone over a bunch of times and really think about it. It's so helpful to me to really assess the whole world around me.
And I think an extreme example of this, and I always keep this in mind. So John Nash, who was, obviously immortalized in the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe. He was known for, when he was in school, they often found him laying on a desk or, looking up at the ceiling, and they're like, what is he doing? And he didn't like reading about prior math texts. He wouldn't read through them. He would derive that mathematical formula or that whatever it was, from his own work, in his own mind. So he would just sit there and imagine, how would you get to this? What would you do? And he often came to the same conclusion of, whatever the hypothesis was or whatever was put out there on his own. He did it from a different angle. And that's ultimately what allowed him to come up with his PhD thesis,
right,
which was so influential in the area of economics. He created something really incredible because he came at it from a unique perspective.
Yeah.
And I just think that if we lose that, at the end of the day, it's the people who are not relying on those things, on those tools, who can maintain their creativity. Those are the ones who are going to push our world forward. I think the scary thing is that for those who are reliant on those tools, who never develop the thinking skills, they become the very types of people who don't have the critical thinking capacity to be able to make decisions, whether we're talking interpersonally, on their job, and then we can get into topics of national or global importance.
How do we encourage people to really think in ways that allow them to get critical of what's normal, ask, is this actually working? And if not, how can we be better? And then actually empower people to go and do something about it. I don't see a lot of that happening, unfortunately.
Well, I think it comes down to, you have to be so intentional about disconnecting yourself from those things and using a tool, whatever the tool might be, as a tool and not a crutch. And I think I think that where we are right now is that we're at this place where it's becoming very quickly more of a crutch than it is the thing that, and that's scary, because the crutch itself then becomes the totality of your understanding of the world.
Right.
And that's unfortunately debilitating to us long term.
Right. Well, and I think one of the interesting facets of how this functions in the world too is, one of the things we see is that with the increase in potential efficiency with technology, we ask people to work more. We ask people to put more hours into certain tasks involved in work, and to not have as much time for things like leisure, for spending time with family, for the things that can often fill a person with a sense of creativity and desire to pour into those things that would help them to be a better critical thinker, that would help give them the energy to see a different way to do things. And the truth is, too, with technology changing as quickly as it is, I think when we feel uncertain, human beings tend to like a black and white approach. Like, this is right, this is wrong, this is bad, this is good, end of story. When things feel uncertain, that sort of concrete thinking feels safest, rather than really interrogating, is what I'm seeing here actually all that there is going on, or is there something deeper going on under the surface?
Yeah. So I want to end by talking about a story from the Bible, actually, that's found in the book of Genesis, that's known colloquially as the story of the Tower of Babel, which is based on an actual tower, the ziggurats of the Babylonian Empire, where they would build them up, and they were these huge towers that were used for the worship of their gods. Now, this particular story in the book of Genesis is really fascinating because essentially the idea is that everybody can speak the same language. And so the idea is that if they could build a tower, and at the time what they believed, because they didn't understand that the sky was a barrier to space, they thought that space and what they saw up above, because you can see, if you've ever been in like really with no light pollution, you can literally see the curvature of the atmosphere against the sky. And so they thought of it as like a dome, like there was a dome and that there was water above the dome, and that that's where the stars were kind of gods and angels and all those types of things. So if you could get high enough, the idea was that there would be a door, and that door would lead you into heaven, literally, as you get there. And so in the story, the idea is that like, hey, let's build a tower that will allow us to get into heaven. And of course, what ends up happening is God's like, ooh, that's not good. So God decides to confuse the language that they can't speak, and that's why the term Babel, right? The idea that we can't, like when somebody's babbling, that you can't understand each other, they had to leave off from doing it. Now, that story is really fascinating because it's the idea, it's a brilliant kind of metaphor for the idea that through technology, a technological innovation, like a building, that humans become more like God, that we're always kind of striving towards this idea of having a godlike ability in the world. And I think AI is one of the most fascinating of those. If you think about those qualities that most Westerners attribute to a god, AI, if it ever becomes conscious, will have access to those things. It's omnipresent in the sense that it literally could have access to all the cameras all around the world via the internet. So it could literally see all things. It's omniscient in the sense that it's all-knowing. It has access to all of the information on the internet. Every bit of human knowledge is stored there, so it has the ability to do that. It's all-powerful in the sense that it can control things. Now that it's connected to the internet, it can control all things. The big question is, will it be omnibenevolent? Will it be good, right? And so what's interesting is that we have, the reason why we bring up the story of the Tower of Babel is because we have literally created a technology that can be like a god to us. So the question becomes, what lessons can we learn from a story like the Tower of Babel for where we are clearly headed today with our technology?
Our desires to attain more knowledge often start from a good place. And then we as human beings, what I find is that desire to attain more, to gain more success, to get more money, to climb higher, to achieve more power, to have more power over people rather than giving more power to other people. That seems to be something that every single technological innovation brings for every generation. And so I think that understanding that the human being sitting right next to you is more important than attaining more, than climbing some ladder, than trying to take on some of what God offers us. I think that really valuing humankind, valuing connection, valuing kind of the word that comes to mind for me is like there's something truly divine in every person that we can so easily neglect when we become hyper fixated on the piece of technology that's in our pocket, when we're scrolling incessantly, when we're guided by a value that tells us that we need to get more and more and more to have worth. I think that what can really change that, and that can also bring us kind of like using the Babylon, the Tower of Babel metaphor, that can kind of like pull us down from that place that we're trying to climb to and ground us back into the fact that God is not, like God is here right now in everything. That like, it's not like we have to go anywhere or do anything to really find that. Sometimes all we need to do is look inside ourselves or look at the person who's willing to sit with us to really find some sort of sense of the divine right here, to really re-ground ourselves in what's most important and valuable to us.
I think that's a good lesson to learn from that, and I would concur wholeheartedly. Really? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's probably the best thing we can take away from it. And I would say that for you all out there who are watching this on your technology, that I hope that you can assess the pieces of your life that you feel like maybe aren't the way you want them to be. If there's technology standing in the way of that, set that aside. But I really do believe in the power of human beings to be with each other, and that the technology should be an aid to that, not the totality of how we interact and spend time together. And so hopefully with some of the hopefully the positives can outweigh the negatives. And I hope that for you all out there that you have the opportunity in your life to be able to move beyond what the technology might be inhibiting for you, that you have the ability to overcome and move forward. So we'll keep talking about this, I'm sure, well into the future, and wishing you the very best, and we'll be back for another conversation next week.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye.